In a dusty frontier settlement at the edge of Apache territory, a quiet widow in a worn gray dress stood outside the general store at sundown, clutching money from selling her late husband's horses. Four-armed drifters surrounded her, demanding she hand over every coin. She had nothing left, no family, no protection, just debts and a small homestead 3 miles out. The leader grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, laughing when she warned him to let go. He saw a defenseless woman alone. What he didn't see were the scars on her forearms, fine lines earned in a canyon years ago, under the watch of Apache warriors who'd raised her as their own and taught her that mercy was the hardest blade to master. When she moved, it lasted 3 seconds. His grip broke. His confidence shattered. And what happened next would reveal a past no one expected and a reckoning this town would never forget. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The dust had barely settled from the widow's boots when the 4 riders cut her off outside Brennan's general store. Sundown bled orange across the settlement's single street, casting long shadows that made the men look taller than they were. The leader, a thick-necked brute with a scar splitting his left eyebrow, stepped forward first, his hand closing around her forearm like a vice. The fabric of her gray dress bunched under his grip. "Word is you just sold off your dead husband's horses," he said, his breath sour with whiskey. "That's a face sum for a woman alone. Hand it over." She didn't flinch. Her eyes, dark and steady as river stone, met his without fear or pleading. Around them, the street had gone silent. A shopkeeper's hand froze on his broom. 2 children ducked behind a water barrel. "Let go," she said quietly, "and we'll forget this." The leader laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and tightened his grip until his knuckles whitened. His 3 companions shifted closer, forming a loose half-circle that blocked her path to the hitching post. Then she moved. Her free hand snapped to his wrist. A precise twist, sharp, economical, and his grip broke with an audible pop of stressed joints. He stumbled backward, shock flooding his face as pain registered. His gun hand hovered uselessly near his holster. The other 3 closed in, hands dropping to their belts. What they couldn't see were the scars on her forearms, fine, deliberate lines half hidden beneath her sleeves, marks earned in a canyon years ago under the watch of those who moved like shadows and struck like lightning. The leader's companions hesitated, uncertainty flickering across their faces as their boss nursed his wrist. 8 years melted away in her mind's eye. She saw the wagon again, her parents' blood soaking into Kansas soil, raiders laughing as they kicked through scattered belongings. She'd crawled into tall grass, 14 years old and dying of thirst, when different hands found her. Apache hands, gentle, deliberate, belonging to warriors who'd been tracking those same raiders for days. The elder warrior, Naish, and his wife had no children. They saw something in her fever-bright eyes, not weakness, but will. They carried her to their camp, fed her, spoke to her in a language that became her second tongue. She wasn't a captive. She was family. For 3 years, she learned. Naish taught her the blade arts with patience that bordered on reverence, how to read an opponent's weight shift before they moved, how to control distance, how a knife was extension of breath and intent. His wife taught her to grind mesquite, to track weather in the sky, to understand that survival and vengeance were not the same path. The hand that hesitates invites death, Naish had told her one dawn, correcting her grip. But the hand that rushes invites disgrace. Know what you can live with. She'd married Thomas 3 years later, a quiet ranch hand who asked about the scars on her arms and listened without judgment when she told him. He'd died 6 months ago, fever taking him in 4 terrible days, leaving her a homestead and debts that sold his horses couldn't quite cover. "Marshall." The voice snapped her back. Mrs. Brennan, the store owner, stood in the doorway, her weathered face sharp with alarm. "Someone fetch the marshal." "Is 3 towns over?" one of the riders sneered. "Circuit judge rotation. Won't be back for a week." The widow felt the weight of the 2 knives tucked beneath her shawl, one at each hip, hidden in the folds. Her fingers could reach them in a heartbeat. End this in seconds. But Naish's voice echoed, disgrace or death. She chose mercy. "Take half the money," she said evenly. Leave town now. I won't report this. The leader spat into the dirt at her feet, his pride stinging worse than his wrist. Grab her, he snarled to his men. Allie, now! Rough hands shoved her toward the narrow gap between the general store and the livery stable. She let them push her into the shadows, back striking the weathered planks. The four men crowded the alley's mouth, blocking the fading sunlight. The leader flexed his injured wrist, his face twisted with humiliation that demanded an audience but feared one. Then she erupted. Her right hand struck the first man's forearm, a precise nerve blow Naish had drilled into her 1,000 times. His fingers went numb. His revolver clattered onto hard-packed earth. Before he could shout, she pivoted low, sweeping the second man's legs. He hit the ground hard, breath exploding from his lungs. The third lunged. She caught his extended arm, twisted, and drove him to his knees with a joint lock that made him gasp in pain. The leader's gun cleared leather. She was already inside his reach, the blade from her boot singing free, cold steel kissing the stubbled hollow of his throat. His eyes went wide. The gun hung useless between them. Half the money, she repeated, her voice calm as Sunday prayer. Leave town. Last chance. He nodded, throat working against the blade's edge. She stepped back. He grabbed the coin pouch she'd tucked in her belt, divided it with shaking hands, and backed toward their horses. His men scrambled after him, cradling injuries and pride. Within minutes, hoofbeats faded east down the settlement road. But as dust swallowed them, the youngest rider, barely 20, with a hot head's flush, turned in his saddle. We ain't done, he snarled to the others. She made fools of us. Night fell heavy over her homestead, 3 miles outside town. The cabin sat in a clearing ringed by juniper and scrub oak. Thomas's careful choice, far enough for privacy, close enough to hear trouble coming. She'd just finished mucking the stalls when she smelled smoke. 6 riders this time. 2 new faces, hired guns with dead eyes and tied-down holsters. They circled her property like wolves, torches high. The barn erupted in flames, dry hay catching fast. Horses screamed inside. She'd already freed them hours ago, some instinct warning her. Come out unarmed, the leader shouted, or we burn it all. She stepped onto the porch, lantern in one hand, a leather-wrapped bundle in the other. No weapons visible. She set the bundle on the weathered planks, backed away, hands open to the firelight. The leader dismounted, suspicious but curious. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a single blade, 10 inches of steel, the handle wrapped in traditional rawhide, its guard marked with symbols few white men would recognize. Beneath it, a note in Spanish, which one of the hired guns read aloud. You were given mercy. You chose shame. At dawn, you leave or you answer. They laughed, harsh, nervous sounds. Then the leader looked up. The porch stood empty. The lantern burned alone. She'd vanished into the darkness around her own land, and the night suddenly felt full of eyes they couldn't see. The hours before dawn belonged to her. The 6 men huddled near the burning barn's embers, feeding the fire high, convinced light would keep them safe. They decided to rush the cabin at first light. Overwhelming force, no more games. But she'd spent the darkness doing what Naish had taught her, turning familiar ground into advantage. The first man fell when his horse stepped through a rope snare hidden in tall grass. The loop tightened, yanking him from the saddle. He hit earth hard. When knocked out, his rifle skittering away into shadow. The second never saw the stone, fist-sized, thrown with practiced accuracy, that whistled past his mount's ear. The horse spooked, bolted sideways, and plunged into a shallow gully. The rider tumbled free, unharmed but stranded, his horse disappearing into the pre-dawn gray. The third discovered his stillbag strap had been cut, clean, surgical, when his supplies exploded across the ground. Ammunition, jerky, a flask that shattered on stone. He spun, searching the darkness, seeing nothing but juniper shadows that might have hidden anything. Psychological warfare. Patient, relentless. By the time the sun cracked the eastern horizon, only 2 men remained mobile. The leader, wild-eyed and sweating despite the morning chill, and the young hothead whose pride had started this. She stepped into the open 20 paces away. The challenge blade caught the new light, steel and symbols that spoke of a world these men had never tried to understand. The handle bore markings, protective wards, her adopted name in a language older than their grandfather's land claims. The leader's revolver cleared leather, hammer cocking loud in the still air. Her teachers had taught her, the warrior who draws first has already lost the choice to walk away. She'd offered mercy twice. They'd answered with fire and numbers and the arrogance of men who believed a woman alone was prey by definition. What would you do? Spare them again, or end the threat? She moved. Her hand scooped earth and flung it in a smooth arc. The dirt cloud caught the leader square in the eyes. No injury, just blindness and panic. She closed the distance before he could blink clear, her blade singing as it cut. Not deep, a shallow slice across his gun wrist that opened skin and severed control. The revolver dropped. He clutched his arm, howling. The young hothead charged, his own knife drawn, rage overriding sense. She pivoted, letting his momentum carry him past. Her hand caught his extended arm, fingers finding the pressure point Nash had shown her on a summer afternoon when she was 16 and certain she'd never need this knowledge. One fluid motion, disarm, redirect, lock. He crashed to his knees, his knife in her hand now, his shoulder joint screaming. She held him there, the challenge blade at rest, and spoke the words her Apache father had given her like inheritance. Strength without honor is just noise. She released him, stepped back, reversed his knife and offered it handle first. He stared, comprehension dawning through pain and shock. You're going to the marshal, she said, her voice carrying to all 6 men now. The scattered, the beaten, the humiliated. You'll confess. Every crime, every choice that brought you here. She paused, letting them see the blade's engravings in full morning light, the symbols of protection and the name that wasn't English. Well, I'll track each of you. And next time, I won't stay my hand. 3 days later, the widow rode into town at noon with 6 men walking behind her horse. Their hands were bound with rope, no brutality, no blood, just raw humiliation and the kind of exhaustion that comes from miles walked under a relentless sun. The leader's wrist was bandaged. The young hothead kept his eyes on the dirt. The hired guns looked like men who'd reconsidered their profession. The street fell silent as she dismounted outside the marshal's office. Mrs. Brennan emerged from the general store, her hand rising to her mouth. A crowd gathered, shopkeepers, ranch hands, families who'd heard whispers of the bonfire and the confrontation. They stared at the widow in her dusty gray dress, her weathered hands loose on the reins, and the 6 men who shuffled like penitents. Tell them, she said quietly. The leader spoke first, his voice hoarse. Attempted robbery, arson, assault on this woman's property. Each word seemed to cost him. The others nodded, adding their confessions in mumbled fragments. Crimes across 3 counties, thefts, threats, the kind of violence that accumulated when no one stopped it early. The circuit marshal arrived that afternoon, dust-covered and weary from the trail. He was a pragmatic man in his 50s, gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen enough frontier justice to know the difference between law and revenge. He'd known Thomas, had drunk with him twice, and heard rumors about the quiet widow with scars on her arms. He interviewed her privately in the back room of the marshal's office. She showed him the challenge blade, the engravings, the symbols, the name written in a language most white men called savage without ever learning a word of it. She told him the truth. Taken in by an Apache family after raiders murdered her parents, raised as kin, trained in their ways for 3 years. Violence only as final answer, mercy as first choice, a code she carried into her marriage and beyond. The marshal studied the blade, turned it in the afternoon light streaming through the window, and made a decision that surprised them both. I'm deputizing you, he said. Unofficial territorial scout. No badge, but a letter of marque. You can protect your land, the travelers on those remote roads near your homestead. You've earned it. The town council convened within the hour, their faces skeptical. A woman, with savage training? But Mrs. Brennan stood before them, her voice steady and sharp as good steel. She had every right to kill them, the store owner said. Every legal and moral right. She chose law instead. That's more restraint than half the men in this room would have shown. The murmurs shifted, suspicion giving way, inch by grudging inch, to something that might become respect. The young hothead approached her as the crowd dispersed, shame written across his sunburned face. "I'll rebuild your barn," he said. "Work off the debt, however long it takes." She studied him, 20 years old, a future he hadn't ruined yet. "You'll rebuild it," she agreed, "and you'll learn to read and write. I'll teach you, so you have a choice beyond this." He blinked, startled, then nodded. 1 year later, the widow's homestead had become something unexpected, a sanctuary. Travelers on the frontier road knew her place. The rebuilt barn, the well-tended garden, the woman who offered water and bread without questions. They left offerings in gratitude. Smoked venison, horseshoes, coins wrapped in cloth, once a harmonica that still sat on her mantle. The young man who'd been a hothead visited monthly now, riding freight guard routes with a book always in his stillbag. He'd learned to read by lantern light at her kitchen table, stumbling through sentences until they flowed. Today he brought her a new volume, poetry, which made her smile. At sunset, she stood near Thomas's grave with a sapling in her hands. Mrs. Brennan watched from a respectful distance as the widow dug earth and planted the young cottonwood, Apache tradition, a living memorial. She spoke 2 names aloud, Thomas first, then her own adopted name in the language Nash had given her, honoring both halves of a life that had never been simple but had become whole. Mrs. Brennan approached, carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a shawl the town's women had embroidered together, Apache geometric patterns woven alongside frontier quilt designs, 2 worlds stitched into one fabric. The widow accepted it, her throat tight with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite joy. She'd been taught that the blade was only as honorable as the hand that held it. And every day, she chose to hold it with mercy. Her story spread across the territory, but it wasn't the last time someone underestimated a quiet woman with a hidden past. Next, discover what happened when a traveling preacher arrived in a town that had forgotten the difference between justice and revenge.